Hi, this is Jeffrey Wernick, and the full panel is back. We're really happy to have Dennis back after not having Dennis for, I guess, like 2 weeks. Not saying that to make you feel guilty, just really happy that you're back. And of course, we have Bruce and Ryan. So glad to have the whole gang here. I'd like to just start off briefly. I'm going to read sometimes, we put something up and we have an intention to talk about one topic and something else comes along between when we choose a topic and the date we actually have, our Fein Points. So something that I think is very important and that maybe has not been adequately, sufficiently reported and has gotten the circulation and merit that I think it deserves is an article written that was published in The Atlantic. It was written by Mark Wolf. Who was Mark Wolf? Mark Wolf was a federal judge, and he wrote an article on why I am leaving the federal bench. And after that, I will ask Bruce some comments, and of course, open it to everyone else because Bruce actually knew Mark Wolf or knows Mark Wolf. So I'm just going to read part of it. In 1985, President Ronald Reagan appointed me as a federal judge. I was 38 years old at the time. I looked forward to serving for the rest of my life. However, I resigned Friday, relinquishing the lifetime appointment and giving up the opportunity for public service that I have loved. My reason is simple. I no longer can bear to be restrained by what judges can say publicly or do outside the courtroom. President Donald Trump is using the law for partisan purposes, targeting his adversaries while sparing his friends and donors from investigation, prosecution, and possible punishment. This is contrary to everything that I have stood for in my more than 50 years in the Department of Justice and on the bench. The White House's assault on the rule of law is so deeply disturbing to me that I feel compelled to speak out. Silence for me is now intolerable. Okay. To give some perspective also, and then I'm going to quickly turn this over to Bruce. There was a point in time when there was a crisis at the Department of Justice, and this was after the Watergate hearings. And after the Watergate hearings, when Nixon resigned and Ford became president, Ford wanted to restore some of the institutional credibility, especially in the Justice Department, and he chose someone to lead the Justice Department, an attorney general, who actually was president of the University of Chicago when I was a student there, and left Chicago to become the attorney general. And Wolf worked with Edward Levy, who was the one who became the attorney general. And if there was one thing that people, whether they agree ideologically or philosophically with Edward Levy, is there seems to be broad consent and agreement that Levy brought integrity and nonpartisanship back to the Justice Department, leaving what was a period of time when we had attorney generals who subsequently went to jail. So, so it was very fragile time in our history to restore, credibility to one of the most important departments. Obviously, meting out justice is not much of a better service for the public than actually the application of our justice. And that, Gerald Ford, I think most people think, made a good choice, even if whether they always agreed with Levy or not. I don't think people didn't question his integrity. Bruce, you know Mark Wolf. You also knew Edward Levy. You were around during the Nixon years, and you were also involved with Ronald Reagan. So maybe you could add a lot more color to this than I'm capable of doing.
No, I mean, I think what you've described is accurate. I knew Mark Wolf was in the Deputy Attorney General's office. Mark was always fair and extremely committed to justice, which had fallen into disrepute under President Nixon. We know that one of his attorney generals, John Mitchell, spent 3 years in prison. His successor, Richard Kleindienst, also was convicted of a crime. There was kind of an interregnum of William Saxby, a former senator, before Edward Levy then arrived. And this was at the time that there was turmoil also at the FBI with the COINTELPRO. We know that J. Edgar Hoover had died in 1971. There had been the Church Committee reports exposing all sorts of intelligence and investigative abuses. Edward Levy was responsible for promulgating the Levy guidelines that reined in the kind of investigative intrusiveness that the FBI had utilized to disturb groups based upon ideology. Again, I can testify all conversations were on the merits. Never was a Republican or Democrat. It was always, this is what the law requires. This is what is fair and just, which was a breath of fresh air after serving the Nixon administration, where you saw attorneys generals come and go, including under Elliot Richardson, who resigned rather than fire the special prosecutor. And I think it underscores the importance that will be true if we're thinking a little bit down the road of if we are going to get back to constitutional regular order, the next attorney general who will succeed whoever is there when Mr. Trump leaves will be critical, because unfortunately, I knew Edward Levy, and Pam Bondi is no Ed Levy, to recall about Senator Benson and Dan Quayle. Dan Quayle was no John Kennedy, and Pam Bondi is no Edward Levy. She is an echo chamber of what Mr. Trump tells her to do. She's bypassed with regard to the pardons. I think today President Trump pardoned Rudy Giuliani, among other of his friends, of at least the federal crimes that he may have committed. So that will be, we need to be thinking already about restoring justice. I think right now, the way that Mr. Trump is behaving, and unfortunately, we don't have a Congress that's willing to push back and consider impeachment for totally corrupting the rule of law. But it needs to happen very quickly. Otherwise, I think justice will be permanently stained.
Before opening this up for Dennis and Ryan Klein for comments, I'd like to ask just a couple more questions of you. To your best of your knowledge, with the time and conversations you've had an opportunity to speak with Mark Wolf, would you describe him as a communist?
No, no, not a communist, not a socialist. No, he was a Ronald Reagan. He's a Ronald Reagan Republican. We didn't agree with everything, but surely he was that stripe. I never heard him use the word Democratic Party, or even our good friend here, Dennis Kucinich. He's a Republican. It doesn't mean that he would disrespect Dennis, but I think he was on the other side of at least the political aisle at that time. So those are absurd, terms to apply to Mark Wolf. The one thing that I would add, Jeffrey, and that is, this is the same kind of resignation that happened a long time ago, also from Massachusetts. And Mark Wolf was the district judge in federal district court in Massachusetts. And that is, there's another famous Massachusetts jurist named Benjamin Curtis, who sat on the U.S. Supreme Court. He dissented in a fabulous case, Dred Scott versus Sanford, exposed the complete hollowness and intellectual fragility of Chief Justice Taney's statement that whites had no obligation to respect any rights of blacks. And after the Dred Scott decision, he resigned and took up the abolitionist cause. So Mark Wolf is following in very cherished and honored footsteps here.
Yeah. Dennis, do you have?
Yeah, I don't know Mark Wolf, but I can say that the statement that he made in connection with his resignation should cause all of us to reflect on the status of legal enforcement of anything in the United States. There seems to be one set of laws for the president and his friends, and another set of laws for the people that he doesn't like. Now, the Constitution, when that president takes the oath of office, he takes an oath to, faithfully defend the Constitution and execute the laws. The lack of impartiality here inevitably is going to lead to a breakdown, because the law is the glue that holds the country together. And if you have an executive branch which is pursuing, for whatever reason, a course towards enforcement only for those who oppose him, and a course towards forgiveness and clemency for those who are his friends, things fall apart. And so the resignation of this judge is a warning of what's happening. Think of how many federal judges he spoke for, who are very concerned that the independence of the judiciary is being shattered right now. And the polarization in the country between the Democrats and Republicans, which has produced a government breakdown for at least 40 days, also reflects a polarization between the executive branch and the legislative branch, the executive branch and the judicial branch. Look out.
Well, I think I'm a little I agree completely, but I would say it's even more than a warning. I don't want to be too hopeful, because it's hard to know for sure. But with what we're doing here, I get the sense that this is the beginning of what we're actually fighting to do, right? Like this, I mean, either way, this is the beginning of that. If somebody's standing up as a Republican and just making a very big statement that this is wrong, the path we're on is wrong. And I think that what we're seeing in a large way is that awareness growing, what we're doing, people beginning to speak out, conservatives, even Candace Owens coming out and saying that Trump has betrayed everybody, or an article in the USA Today about how, core conservatives feel swindled by what's happening. And we're watching a very quick change here. Now, I don't think it's because everyone's suddenly seeing it. I do think that is a huge part of it. But like we've talked about, there's a lot of opportunism, as Bruce often points out, of politicians having ulterior motives. That's just a common reality. So I think in a large way, we're just starting to watch that reality set in, that there's enough awareness that there are politicians that are going to begin to start to point this out for their own benefit, or maybe because they just see enough opening to make that case. Now, I respect the person who did this, the taking, sacrificing his career to make a point that people can pay attention to. So I'm very hopeful that this is actually sort of the beginning of a watershed moment.
Well, this is go ahead, Bruce.
I would just add that, remember, Mark Wolf had a lifetime appointment. He didn't have to run for any office. He wasn't a politician. And moreover, the way the system works is that if he stayed as a judge, senior status, he gets full pay, even though as senior judge, he's not serving full time. So he paid a financial penalty too by leaving the bench. So I think that he's in a different category than someone who's serving in the Congress or the executive branch.
Definitely.
And he witnesses, exactly what the Justice Department is doing when it comes before him and makes these outrageous statements, lies, deceptions, evasions, and that the system can't work on that basis. I mean, I know I litigate, I worked in the Department of Justice. Judges know at least 50% of the rule of law depends upon judges being able to rely that government officials will tell them the truth, right? There isn't, otherwise the system completely breaks down. And that's what's happening now, where the judges can't accept what the department is representing. The government's position is, what does the evidence show? Is there an emergency or not? What are the statistics? That the judges are now coming to believe, well, these are likely to be lies. I mean, look at all these statements. Well, they're national emergencies. And now we have today in the Washington Post, there are videos that are distributed by the government that aren't real videos of what's going on in these cities that are taken over. They're videos on the South Pacific or someplace else that they use and to concoct in order to make it appear that certain places are more dangerous than others. I wouldn't put anything behind this, this administration. including concocting allegations with classified information. We have all this evidence that the government of Venezuela is invading the United States. And I say the system can't work with a minimal level of trust and credibility. You can't investigate everything. You have to assume that, the government's telling at least partially truthful information, and that's not happening anymore.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I wanted to emphasize this, and Bruce, you already did such an excellent job of summarizing it, is yes, he had a job he apparently loved that he expected to do the rest of his life, and he decided that it was more important for him to leave something that was very valuable to him, because doing this was even more important. One thing is, I'm an influencer and I got an audience out there and I want to keep that audience engaged with me, and that's a different thing. That's a business model. So this is somebody out there, there's no sacrifice involved. So unless they're willing to sacrifice their total audience to tell what they really believe is the truth, but I don't believe that's the case. I think they kind of know what their audience is like. And I think they know how to appeal to the audience. This is someone who did not think about, this is going to make me popular with any audience. If anything, it's going to make him a target, not popular. So the level of sacrifice involved in doing what he did. And the other thing I'd like to add, and then Dennis, then as you comment, is this is not somebody who said, I'm a Democrat and I hate to see all these rulings, of Democrats. This is somebody who is a Republican, limited government, legitimate, conservative person. So who is appalled, even though his own party is in control. That's like he's not a rhino. He's not a turncoat. Okay. He's true to the philosophical beliefs, as Bruce Houston, of Ronald Reagan, unless the Republican Party and the other people like the Mark Levins of the world now want to sit back and change their opinion and think that Ronald Reagan was a communist, a socialist, and that Ronald Reagan actually was a rhino himself. But I think many people in MAGA might think that of Reagan, but I think a lot of the base of Republicans, I think if you would poll your Republicans in office, say, do you think Ronald Reagan sucked? I don't think many people would probably say that he was one of the, maybe after Obama and Carter, he might have been the worst president after that. So, Dennis, what were you going to say?
There's a much wider discussion this opens up, Jeffrey, because, it goes to the mythic dimensions of the quality of justice, of impartiality, of equal justice before the law, of an independent judiciary. And, these are all myths that are tested in reality. And we're finding that, the questions are out there. People, wonder if, if it's better to know the judge than to know the law. I'm concerned because we're seeing a fracturing of institutions here that have served this country for almost 250 years, with all the flaws, like, Bruce pointed out the Dred Scott case, which was execrable. But the myth of independence is starting to be shattered here. And we have some real questions to ask about, where is our government headed? What are we about? Is this a republic anymore, or are we starting to grow banana trees in our backyard here?
Yeah, I agree with that. And going back to Ryan's comment, and I completely agree with that, Dennis, Ryan's comment, with respect to, think about what probably is the incentive structure of the people in this administration. We had the guy in Chicago who was shooting people with gas, I think Bovino or something like that. Okay. He had testified to the judge that he was responding to a rock being thrown at his head. That's what he said. Okay. So the judge asked for all the films that they had, and when they reviewed the films, they saw him shooting at people without any provocation.
Mm.
And he admitted after he lied. Okay,
Mm.
so he admitted after he lied. So the question is, when he told the lie, was probably the lie encouraged by people in the Department of Justice? And now that he's disclosed himself, he's admitted that he lied. Okay. If you had a real Justice Department, what do you do with somebody who goes to a court and tells lies and starts shooting at people, okay, based upon a false premise that they were attacked first, and that they weren't attacked first, they just enjoyed, shooting at people, okay? You would think that a rational Justice Department would fire somebody who did that, okay? Right. But is there any indication he's got his wrists slapped? Has anyone spoken out against, saying that his lie is appalling? No, they're probably chatting on the back and say, didn't work this time, good job, keep at it. That's clearly the case because he suffered no adverse consequences associated with the lie. So what we could see is it should be evident that the Justice Department is encouraging people to lie and see if they can get away with their lies. And it's no big deal if they can't get away with their lies. And how could anyone who says, I really want justice, have somebody be in a position where they work for the Department of Justice, where they lied to a judge, okay? They later admitted that they lied to a judge, so there's no longer a question about that they lied to the judge, and that they still have a job.
I think you nailed it on the head here, Jeffrey. I think we've always talked about, just there's corruption, there's different manipulations that have always been there. And I think we can all agree, as you pointed out last time, that what's happening today is unique. And what Trump's administration is doing is so far beyond what we've seen before. But we can acknowledge that there's always been levels of lies and manipulations. I think the difference that you pointed out there is that whether it's from the administration just demonstrating, signaling that they'll back up any lie in ICE or anywhere else, or just that their actions have demonstrated that that's what they're doing and other people take that light. We're watching people just go all the way in every possible position, whether it's Noam or Bondi or Hegseth or just the individual ICE people on the ground. It's obvious that they're, like you're saying, completely backing up every action, every lie. And that's just the obvious. It's sort of like the mafia enforcing on itself, right? In the past, it's existed and they kind of shut down people that try to make it obvious. But if everyone started just killing everybody in front of them, the whole world sees what they're doing. I kind of feel like that's where it is. And whether this is the system checking what they're doing or just that it's out of control. And, the point is with these judges resigning and people calling it out, it's too obvious to everybody. So I think you nailed it. That's the difference, is that it's just so blatant that it's everywhere. But I don't know why what would Trump's mindset be? What would the administration be? What would the logic be for doing it so blatantly? To me, it just seems like almost incompetence. I just don't know how to explain it.
But we know that we have a wholesale violation of the executive's duty to faithfully execute the laws. It's inconceivable that no matter what an ICE agent did, that they would ever be prosecuted for anything, even murder. Self-defense. Right now we're committing murder. I think we now got at least 76, attacking alleged or suspected drug traffickers, although there's no evidence forthcoming. They're not engaged in violence against the United States. And there's 76 murders out there, even though the military code of justice says that somebody in the military must disobey clearly illegal order. These orders are clearly illegal under any standard, even the standard at Nuremberg. Does anyone really think the Justice Department is going to prosecute, the military for committing murder? Of course not. And that gives a license to lawlessness. They know nothing's going to happen. And that's why they are so brazen about this. Now, they may think, Trump's not going to be there forever. And the statute of limitations, if 5 years, and most of these felonies may come back to haunt them. But they're so inside that bubble. They're basically loyal to one person, Mr. Trump. They're not loyal to the Constitution. They're not loyal to the rule of law. They're loyal to just Mr. Trump. And they say that's exactly the earmark of Nazi Germany. You had to be loyal to Adolf Hitler, not the Weimar Constitution.
Well, let's think about what the Supreme Court did. When again, I still blame the Supreme Court for a lot of this because of them inventing this very broad immunity that the Constitution never contemplated. A president should have. there's no evidence the Constitution ever contemplated that there should be any immunity, let alone the type of broad immunity that they granted out of thin air for Trump and maybe subsequent presidents to have, with this Supreme Court. Who knows whether they'll, they already said that precedent is irrelevant. So, so they could use this for Trump, and then if non-Trump comes in, they could just basically say, I was wrong then. Forget about president. I'm not bound by president. I've already said I don't really feel president is that important. So you could just change your mind. So, and we might find that they might radically change their mind if somebody else was occupying, the White House. But given that, let's think about this in the context of Bruce, you kind of referred to, okay? You referred to the fact that you have a situation where you have people who can't make a defense, okay, like the Nuremberg defense, where I'm just following orders. Yeah. So now what happens is that what the Supreme Court has said, and what people who believe in the Supreme Court, they basically, that they said is Adolf Hitler could do everything he did, okay? And everyone who followed Adolf Hitler's order would not be subject to any sort of, charge, because they were following the orders of Adolf Hitler. So if, according to the Supreme Court, we could have, I'm not accusing Trump, okay? I want to make sure that people, but according to the Supreme Court, we could have an Adolf Hitler as president who creates concentration camps, tells the military to kill people, and the only hope that they would have is that another the party that's in minority would come in and being able to successfully impeach, the Adolf Hitler. But I would think that's a challenge, because I would think anybody who got elected to impeach Adolf Hitler would probably end up in a concentration camp and killed also. But basically, the Supreme Court made that scenario a possibility. And again, I want to make clear, I'm not accusing Trump of doing that or that Trump would do that. I'm saying is that the Supreme Court made a ruling that opened the door for an Adolf Hitler. Okay.
Yeah, but Jeffrey, it's stronger than that. Remember the dissent of Justice Sotomayor, which was not disputed by the majority, that the president, under the ruling of Trump v. U.S., could dispatch SEAL Team 6 to assassinate political opponents. Immune, right? That was in the public domain. And the majority doesn't say, well, you're exaggerating our holding. It acknowledged that's exactly what the president can do. And plus, it went out of its way to say any presidential communications with the attorney general, including go after my enemy, going after, say, Nixon's enemies list, is automatically immune, no matter how invidiously motivated, how illicitly motivated. And also it suggested the president can pardon anybody, even in advance. He could even say, go commit the crime, and then I will pardon you. Immune. And the majority didn't deny that was the breadth of its immunity rule. That's frightening.
Yes, I agree. That's why I keep bringing it up over and over again. Dennis, what's your thoughts on this?
Not the America I grew up in, that's for sure. It's if you have an executive who has no restraint during his term, you have the potential, and a weak Congress. You have the potential for disaster in the United States, entering into wars, even nuclear wars, based on the whim of an executive, ordering the execution of people summarily, as happened in Venezuela from the air, killing those fishermen, or, I know the administration said there was something else. My feeling, and just go back to what I've been saying, and that is that the bedrock of our country, those constitutional the bedrock of the Constitution has been our protection. And if the Supreme Court has made the president less accountable, that's a threat to the people of the United States, first and foremost. You point out, Jeffrey, that after the fact, a president can still be subject, a former president can be subject to impeachment. That does not repair any of the damage that might be done during a period where an executive has essentially zero accountability. And we don't even know, the kinds of games that are being played behind the scenes where abuse of power, there's symmetry in abuse of power. If we see abuse of power right in front of our face, you can bet it's just on the surface and that there's many other things going on beneath the surface, given the size of our government. So what do I think? I think America better start taking a different direction. Otherwise, we have gone down the rabbit hole into an alternate universe, which is anything but a republic.
Yeah. Let me bring up, I think, to show how far we've descended, the Nixon standard, if you will. Now, under the Supreme Court's ruling in Trump versus U.S., if President Nixon destroyed the White House tapes, President Nixon was in the Oval Office when he told John Dean, White House counsel, well, we can raise the money for the burglars to pay them off. All of those things that are enumerated in the articles of impeachment would have been immune. I mean, you wouldn't, in fact, President Ford wouldn't have needed to pardon President Nixon. He says, he's already immune because all of these wrongs were, the president was in the White House.
Bruce, if he's in more than immune, they would not even be discoverable. According to their ruling, okay, if it's deemed an official act, okay, which is very easy to do because their very definition of official act is very, very broad, okay, and the fact that if he's the president speaking with other people, engage in what he's considered a conversation about an official act, that entire conversation is not discoverable.
No, yes, and we know, again, going back, we know there was this famous conversation that President Nixon had with the director of the CIA, Richard Helms, and said, well, just tell them that if you go investigate the funds that underwrote the Watergate burglary, it would expose national security secrets. And of course, Mr. Helms said no, but under the immunity ruling, not discoverable. It's protected. The obvious obstruction of justice, and it shows, in my judgment, that the court's decision would have been unthinkable at the time of Watergate. And indeed, when it came to the Nixon's taste case, it was unanimous. All of the Nixon appointees voted in favor of full disclosure. There wasn't an immunity here. He had to turn over the White House tapes to the special prosecutor. And I bring that example up to show you how far we've plunged our political culture. And any kind of attachment to what Dennis underscores is the glue of the American people, the U.S. Constitution.
Well,
these things, I say, would have been inconceivable.
It's such a good point, because it really shows you. I mean, I think the reality that we're all highlighting is that this is something that everyone recognizes is ridiculous, right? That's not legitimate. If it undermines these past foundational rulings, it just doesn't make sense. But you could play Stephen Miller's game and simply call this a radical Republican, judicial coup or whatever they're trying to, radical judge, radical Republican extremist. But it's just the same kind of game from either way. What it brings to mind actually is the interesting point of whether or not if this is where we are, does that mean that we don't have an independent judiciary, or is that where it's going? And whether that opened the door to, the ICJ kind of a conversation. It's just, from outside forces, which is not what I'm even wanting. I don't want any outside international force. But what's interesting to think about is that opens the door for the weakening of this country, even from an outside effort, But at the end of the day, this is breaking down the foundational elements of this country. The question is, are they trying to do that? I'm of the mind that might be the case.
Yeah, it's obvious that they want limitless executive power. In part, I believe, is see how Trump is relying almost exclusively on executive orders, even when he has Republican majorities in the House and the Senate.
Right.
He doesn't go to Congress and say, pass the statute. He wants to set the precedent that I can do all of this on my own, even things like his ridiculous executive order, stripping citizens of their status if they didn't have parents who are here in the United States legally. So I believe it's clear that he's trying to establish precedents to say Congress is meaningless. And that's why he uses the word, he's king and he has these videos or whatever. He uses social media to promote himself as king. He luxuriates in that kind of idea. And so, he's not trying. He is wanting to be a one-person dictator, not even a triumvirate in ancient Rome. And that's just ridiculous. And think also of the absurdity. He walks around, or Pam Bondi says, well, going after Letitia James or Comey means no one is above the law. These are the people who are claiming Trump is above the law. At the same time, they're saying, well, no one is above the law. Well, it can't be true. Both things can't be true. Trump has to be under the law or people are above the law.
Bruce, one of the things that continues to come up when we talk about President Trump is this idea that somehow he is an omnicompetent executive with boundless energy and that he's doing all this on his own. There is a machine behind him which is producing these things and submitting them for his signature or auto pen if he uses one. Right. And this is really important because it's not just one man. He's in some ways he's a figurehead, albeit one who has these royal pretensions. He's a figurehead with dozens, even hundreds of people who are feeding him these lines to consolidate power in the executive branch for any number of reasons. And the fact that Congress doesn't fight back is a further destructive undermining of our constitutional system. So, but I just want to make that point because we say Trump, that ends up being a catch-all, and the truth is there are people whose names we probably don't even know who are producing this material. And okay, it looks great to me. The videos that came out after the millions of people marched, 7 million people marched across the country in protest of the president as a jet pilot dumping excrement on the American people who don't like his policies. I mean, this is mind-blowing to think that people who you don't agree with would be treated this way. And he was encouraged to do that. Well, it's not just this one individual. And
it's true.
Dennis, the one thing I would add is, on the one hand, there is a machine, there is an army, there's a whole infrastructure behind it, but the infrastructure is there as a response to his incentives. Okay,
right.
The incentives is you'll curry favor with me. Okay, the king always had a whole bunch of people that go to court that want to curry favor with the king, right? So the king can't operate without all the people who want to curry favor with the king. The king, of course, needs all the people, and the king creates the infrastructure under which people have an incentive that those that rise to the top are the ones best at currying favor with the king. And so this whole machine that does it because they want to get his attention, they want to curry favor with him, and then get the perks and benefits of currying favor with him.
They're not protected, though. Just one point here.
Right.
They're not protected by the Supreme Court ruling.
Well, we don't know yet. Dennis, I think that's premature. We don't know whether somebody who's following an order of Trump that is protected is also immune. The court didn't address that issue. It's an open question. But I want to say, to build on what you said and Jeffrey, this is like, Henry II, who will rid me of this turbulent priest. Somebody goes out and kills, Becket, right? And he gets in the good graces of Henry II. But I will say this, it's a little more mixed. knowing the Department of Justice as I do, there have been over 5,000, half of the workforce of the Justice Department has quit. The most of them very gifted and talented. And you'll see in today's Washington Post, the front page story, they can't find many people who want to replace them. They're second and third and fourth rate. I litigate from time to time against the department. I tell you, they got rotations, lawyers are leaving. So you can see there is that internal silent rebellion. Of course, there are going to be those who hang on, who will do anything. The Adolf Eichmanns there. But they're not all that competent. And that's one of the reasons why, in a very substantial majority of cases, the department is losing, because you have totally incompetent lawyers who don't know how to argue anything. Anyway, it shows that, in my judgment, that you do have, a circle around Trump, the Stephen Miller type, the Steve Bannon types or whatever, who are truly, I believe, deranged if you consider, the Constitution, the benchmark.
And
how do others who are balking?
Yeah, I want to make a couple of points, and then Ryan will go to you. One with respect to the Supreme Court and the immunity ruling. Okay, my belief is, again, just beyond my speculation, is that the reason why they framed it in not only granting the immunity, but their definition of what was discoverable or not was discoverable, is I believe the Supreme Court really believed that if there was a discovery process, Trump would have been convicted. So I think they structured a ruling specifically designed to protect Trump. Okay, so again, there's no way for me to prove it, but my assumption is that they're not stupid people. Okay, these are people who are very, very smart. Many of them have people like Alito have already stated. They think there's a culture war out there. Okay, and they think this is a war to save the country. Okay, and they probably think Trump is the greatest warrior to save the country, so they have to protect the greatest warrior to protect the country. So that's my belief. Again, it's just pure speculation, but I think when smart people come up with a decision that is as dumb as that, it didn't come out because they're stupid. It came out because they did it intentionally, because there was something that they wanted to accomplish. And I think it's clear that I think they must have been confident that there was enough evidence out there that Trump committed crimes. And so they didn't want it to even make it discoverable, because they don't want to deal with an issue is that you got this criminal president that everyone knows is a criminal president, and they're still protecting a criminal president. So they don't want people to know that there was a criminal president. And because they also left it up to them to discover, to determine what's discoverable and what's not discoverable. So whatever they applied to Trump, they could apply completely differently to somebody else who occupied the White House. So I think it was designed specifically. They didn't think about the Constitution. All they thought about is, we want to protect this person. Okay, so we'll write a ruling to make sure he'll never have to worry again. Okay, that's my belief. Again, just speculation, on my part. The other thing that we have also, was all the evidence right now is what happened. Okay, I want to why are Comey and Schiff and the other people, why aren't they already, not already electrocuted? Okay, so what happened? Well, we had people in the Justice Department, apparently faithful Republicans, who first decided, let me take a look at the facts, and is it likely that I'll win this case? And they looked at the evidence and said, there's not enough there. And what happened? They got dumped, and they got replaced by somebody who was completely, seemingly unqualified, who probably could not get through, the qualification process and being ratified, by the Senate, but what was the attribute of that one person? The conversation had to be, are you going to get this done for me? Yes. Okay. You obviously have the qualifications to have the job. So 3 days later, this person who was not a litigator was able to review a case that the experts said was not worth prosecuting, and in her vast experience of litigation, in 72 hours, she figured out there was a really great basis for litigating this case.
But Jeffrey, you forgot, these were Trump appointees who said they're not good. These are not even carryovers. These were Trump appointees. They're not lower down civil servants. So the whole thing is ridiculous. And it's the same kind of deal. He disbelieved his own Attorney General, William Barr. No, there's no fraud in the election. So we know the whole thing is rigged when he walks away from his own appointees.
Yeah, and so one more point I want to make on this. Then today, as you pointed out, Bruce, he pardons a whole bunch of people, okay? How much of that also was not only pardoning his people, but sending them a signal to all the other people right now that says, I have your back. Look at what I'm doing. Don't worry. As long as you're doing it, something that I like you doing, you don't have to worry about whether it's legal or illegal. As long as it's something that serves my interest, okay, that has my back, that's in support of what I'm attempting to accomplish, you will never have to worry about the law. Okay. So I think the timing of this is interesting. Okay. Is because he wanted to encourage the people who are still around that they should not have to worry about lying or committing any crimes whatever happens is he's going to take care of them. That, to me, that was part of what he wanted to accomplish, because you might say, why suddenly is he pardoning all these people? Okay. So I think there's a signaling aspect of what he's doing. So,
and that's why, and we're talking about the independence of the judiciary, but we need to go back to Congress. Remember Ben Franklin, the Congress was supposed to be using impeachment as a substitute for tyrannicide. The idea that Congress would sit there, this is a flagrant abuse of the pardon power. And in the Virginia ratification debates, when the pardon power was raised, Madison said, well, don't worry. If the president pardons, shelters his political friends or otherwise, he'll get impeached and removed from office. And the fact that Congress sits there like a spectator is truly shocking. It's repugnant. I mean, the whole thing that we have a separate branch of government has gone away. They're an echo chamber of the White House, for sure. I mean, Mike Johnson might as well move into the Oval Office. He just takes his orders from Trump and it has no check whatsoever. And that's why we shouldn't just focus on the breakdown in some sense of the judicial branch. It's the legislative branch that's even worse because they are the ones who can operate outside of any executive influence, outside of any judicial influence, and remove somebody from office based on their own determination. They are no longer an honest steward of our liberties and the rule of law. That's the standard for Congress. Congress doesn't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. All it needs to have is a lack of confidence that the occupant is faithfully executing the laws in the Constitution. They don't send him to Siberia. They don't bring out the guillotine. He says you're losing your power. And I'm speechless as to how anemic Congress has become.
Well, to Jeffrey's point, the same kind of signal in the other direction, right? Whether judges or Congress, they're not stupid. They know very well whether they win or not, Trump will try to ruin their lives. I think that's very clearly stated right now. He'll sue them. He'll go after in ways that we won't even probably see, right? I think they all know that. And to the other point, I think one part to add, which we probably all would agree with, is that it's as we've kind of mentioned, joke in other past shows, I called it the junior team. It's the same kind of idea. It's just people that are less competent in these positions that they'll also get thrown under the bus in the moment they need to. That's what I sense from like a Kash Patel or a Bondi. Even within the conservative circles right now, that's kind of the sentiment, is that, Bondi, one of these people is about to be thrown out as the blame for why nothing has happened, then move forward as if it was all, that was the one person that stopped it all from going the way it was going to go. So they're also expendable, and they all know that. So it causes sort of a desperation in these actions. I mean, and this is the high executive branch. That's terrifying.
Yeah, it is, truly.
Dennis?
I'm in listening to this discussion, just stepping back, it's very disturbing that all three branches of government, which we rely on to function in the interests of the people, are not doing that. And I get the feeling that it's like we're living in an altered reality here, where the reality is determined by a blind partisanship in a heavily polarized country, to which this discussion that we're having may seem esoteric. and may seem arcane, instead of understanding this is central to our existence as a nation, that we're fragmenting right now, that it's like going back to Yeats's poem, The Second Coming. All things fall apart, the center cannot hold. We're seeing those center forces which have held the country together just fragmenting, and unless this country is prepared for a restructuring of sorts, we're headed into the dustbin of history.
Yeah.
We cannot survive this way. 56% of our budget right now, discretionary budget, goes towards the military. Well, you've got people who don't know where their next meal is coming from, who don't have a decent roof over their head. Their kids aren't getting a decent education. People's retirement security from corporate America has been jettisoned. Whoa. I mean, really, we are raising here in this discussion very disturbing yet fundamental questions about the basis of our polity, of why do we have a nation? What is it about? And when it becomes when these principles become inconvenient pawns for an executive branch which says, the law be damned, and a Congress which is weak, and a judiciary which feels threatened, we're at the precipice right now.
Yeah, I call an epidemic of constitutional illiteracy. But the second coming, you remember also the words, the best lack all conviction and the worst are filled with passionate intensity. And that's what we have here right now. I mean, the worst are there 24 hours a day, setting a torch to the United States Constitution. But then that's why we always go back to Benjamin Franklin. Ultimately, it's a republic if we can keep it. And that means we, the people, we know that the politicians aren't going to do the right thing out of angelic DNA. It's the people got to tell them, we're voting you out of office unless you do the right thing. And they're not doing that. We have a very docile, citizenry now. Maybe they're distracted with TikTok or whatever. The new generation certainly is. And they're not, displaying all the intensity that they need to about inheriting a rule of law rather than inheriting a despotism. But it's hard even to see, how we go back. And again, we come back to this dilemma. No president has ever surrendered power back that it inherited from the predecessor.
That's why I keep insisting nullification.
Yeah.
A nonviolent cry. Tell every grand jury, government brings a case to you. If it looks like, if it smells, if it doesn't meet the smell test of this is a persecution, just don't like the jury did in the case with the
sandwich case, the hoagie case.
Yes.
So
basically, it seemed like that was an act of nullification. And and from what from the couple of podcasts that I listened to discussing this case, it seemed like the judge who stood over the case was actually sympathetic to the prosecution, not the defense. So the jury determined to find somebody, not convict somebody, even where they got the type of instructions that was Soren's nuanced in a way to basically promote a conviction of the person. They still decided not to convict the person. So I think this was a case where justice was done. And I think we'll do a lot more justice by nullifying, by just telling the government, when you go too far and when you got to use the court of law, and you're using the court of law and you're abusing the courts, we're gonna listen to this stuff and we're just gonna say, no, you should not be wasting our time with this stuff. Okay.
And I think, Jeffrey, that's a strategy. It works on a retail level, but we need to get back to
we need every tool available to us, Bruce.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that
we need one tool. Using one tool doesn't exclude the use of other tools.
Correct. Exactly. And I don't at all dispute that's an important component. We need on 20 cylinders, separation of powers, rule of law, trying to check the abuses of the executive branch, which is clearly the one that's most menacing, because they got the monopoly of violence and they got the monopoly of money. But part of this too, it's so challenging is we have to go back, to civics. We got to get into the classroom in the churches and the mosques, in the synagogues. This is what the United States is about. We're an idea, rule of law. We can disagree, but we all honor the same process. The fair process is what's the earmark of the United States. Everybody gets to march to their own drummer, and our glorious liberty and justice, not domination and control. These fundamental principles of why we even exist as a nation, going back to the Declaration of Independence, it's out the window. They're not even taught anymore, anywhere. And that's got to be in the home, and people got to have a backbone. And, you've got to take a risk to stand up for these principles. Well, the same risk for the 56 signatories of the Declaration of Independence. We got to honor their courage by displaying the same courage ourselves. Right. If we don't get back there, it's just the installment plan. We're going the way of the Roman Empire.
Yeah. And going back to the statement that both Bruce made reference to and Dennis, with respect to Venezuela, Dennis in respect to the fact that we have almost more than half the budget is military spending. And Bruce, you're talking about the murder that's going on here. I think if we want to look to why Trump is doing what he's doing in Venezuela, maybe we ought to look to the words of Donald Trump himself. Okay, what did Donald Trump say in 2023? When I left, exact quote, when I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. Oil, okay? But now we're buying oil from Venezuela. So we're making a dictator very rich, okay? Well, this is what he said, okay? I'm bankrupting them so I can take over their oil, okay? So...
No, but remember, that's how we were going to fund the Iraqi war too. Same refrain, right? We're going to take over all that oil. That was Rumsfeld. That was all the war hawks there. Okay, Iraq war will pay for itself, $2 trillion later, we still haven't got a penny. And the oil is being drilled largely by the Chinese and maybe the Russians. I mean, these are the lunacies that politicians undertake. They lie. If you're not sophisticated, you believe the lies. And apparently the press and the journalists forget about it and move on.
So, but again, this 2023, is there any reference to fentanyl? Any reference to Trinidad? Any references to any of those things? No. I'm bankrupting them, putting them on collapse, coming in and taking the oil. Okay, that's what he said. Okay.
Additionally, I think it's interesting that they never seem to reference what I do know they're aware of. Trump, Elon Musk, these are very public conversations about the interest of rare earth minerals and the future of AI, right? There is one of the largest undiscovered lithium deposits in Venezuela. So it is oil for sure, and gold, right? And it's interesting he states that, but I just think the noticeable absence of that point makes me think it's also maybe even mostly about the rare earth minerals. But your point's important, Jeffrey. It's about just taking what they can from it. And that's the one thing I always at least credit Trump for. Like I like that at least he takes the mask off. He'll show you exactly what he's doing to take the oil. Still criminal, but at least we can see it plainly. But I think it's more than that too.
I have to drop off right now, but I just want to say that to Ryan and Jeffrey and Bruce, thank you for giving me the chance to participate in what I'm sure the viewers are finding is enlightening, but also very disturbing. About the direction that we're in. We're headed in a direction, but we're right in it. And to be aware of what's going on in the moment is critical to be able to assess what we must do in order to stand up for and to save the country that we love. So thank you, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks,
Dennis. But Ryan, let me go back to your point, and maybe Jeffrey's as well. And that is, I can't think of a single instance where the United States invaded a country and then made a profit from it. I know they tell them lithium, they tell all this other stuff. Give me one example where we ever invaded a country and had a net gain from it. They don't exist.
Right.
They're just completely, it's fantasy land,
Corporations wildly profit.
Yeah. Okay. And take two examples, post World War II, we're in Germany, we're in Japan. Do we make money out of that? Were we stealing, the deposits or their brains? I mean, to the extent that we did in Germany, is because we had all the Nazis come to the United States and build our space program,
Right.
with impunity. But it's because these politicians are clueless about economics. Economics works on its own. If it would be that valuable, you'd ask, why isn't Maduro doing this already? Because he doesn't have to sell to the United States. He can have he has intercessors and middlemen that are used all the time to circumvent sanctions. The fact that it's not happening means that I don't think Donald Trump has done, a business model and said, hey, this works. I mean, Jeffrey, I'm sure, could enlighten us all. The detail, the uncertainties when you're undertaking a venture, as whether this would make profits or not, and how can you get investment and over what time period. This is, in my judgment, complete lunacy. We're never going to make a penny out of Venezuela or any other country that we invade. It may be that a particular company may make some money, because they got a monopoly or something like that. But the American economy as a whole is going to go backwards, not forwards, just like we did in Afghanistan and are doing in Iraq today.
Let me ask one thing and then throw it to you, Jeffrey, because I'm sure you have the insight on this. From a business perspective, what Bruce is saying, is it because in your mind that there is not the ability to, or is it because the government has always sort of allowed the corporate side to come in and reap those profits at the expense of the American people? Or is it both? How do you see that?
I think that what Smedley Butler said is that that the military were gangsters for capitalists, and I put capitalists between quotation marks. So, so do I think that we use the military for private companies to extract private gains? Yes, I do. And the question is how much government spending is really oriented to serve a private interest for their private benefits? How much of our military spending? I've always, I've argued with people when people say, what's the cost of us extracting oil? I sit back and say, well, if you add the military's presence in the Middle East, okay, add that to the cost, because if it wasn't about the oil, we wouldn't be spending that money. Okay. So you have to add that to the cost of extraction, because if that wasn't important to us, we wouldn't be extracting all this. So I think ultimately the military is mostly, a gangsters for quote capitalists, and two guys from also I always like to plug University of Chicago, but two professors at the University of Chicago, Luigi Singalis and Ragoran Rajan, wrote a book, I think over 20 years ago, called Saving Capitalism from the Capitalists, because who's trying to destroy capitalism is alleged capitalists, because what we've converted. When I see like what's happened in New York, and I see people say, oh gee, we have so many people who like socialism now and are sympathetic to the socialism. Why do I think that that's happened? I think that's happened is because our system that we tell people is capitalism isn't really capitalism, but we keep using that word. So if you take a look at a system that's not really capitalistic and call it capitalism, then of course, if you have a system that isn't really capitalism, but you call it that, and it's a horrible system, and it doesn't work. So that's why the words I always use, and maybe my words are like different than, the deep state, or any words like that. I view our government as being a crony, corrupt, corporatist cartel. Okay, and for me, they're all out in the open. Okay, but we're so apathetic, we let them get away with it. Okay, so for me, there's nothing hidden. There's a whole bunch of people who using money and influence and power and the military and all this stuff and say, we can all print money. Let's just keep the population dumb. Okay. So, and they're easy to keep dumb. Okay. We'll give them entertainment like in Roman times, the gladiators, where we'll let them watch reality TV and stuff like that. We find that they love that stuff, and they really don't want to pay attention to having, programs like ours to have, in-depth conversations, on these topics. So most people trying to live their life day to day, work hard to support their families, need some downtime for themselves, need some times for entertainment. We got an education system that doesn't really produce people that have good, reasonable cognitive skills. We have people, 8th graders that can't read at an 8th grade level for comprehension. We have 8th graders who can't read, who can't solve math problems at an 8th grade level. So, when people get out of college, only a few percent of them really have, really decent problem solving skills. So, because that's not something you're going to develop if you've had, a horrible educational experience, K through 12. So at the end, you have all these interests that sit back and say, well, we work together because we have aligned incentives. Okay, it's not like you need any sort of great collusive state. It's like the fact is they all have the aligned interests. Okay, how can we each work together to extract money from a population that just isn't paying attention and isn't very smart? So what we don't have capitalism. We don't have anything remotely close to a capitalist system. We have. I think my description is a better description than the deep state. We have a crony, corrupt, corporatist cartel governed by kakistocrats. So I don't think there's any better description than mine.
But Jeffrey, let me ask you, how is that any different, other than maybe choosing different terminology, than the system in China and Russia? It's the same way they work there. Yep. They got cronies, that get the money. I mean, that's all it is. It's the government dictating who gets money and who does not. It's not building a better mousetrap or anything like that. That's what we have in the United States. And it gets worse and worse. I mean, Trump is no different in his approach to the economy than Putin and Xi. He announces this price on this, and then we're now going to have the government take over at least part of Intel, and the exports that are going to be next. The semiconductor chips are determined by the government, and the steel now, Nippon Steel comes, takes U.S. Steel. We're on the board of directors. How in principle is our system any different than Russia and China?
Right. It isn't.
Yeah.
No, exactly. And that's what we ought to
think about today. It's like Trump says national security. Okay. So you take a look at national security. Okay. When he puts the tariffs he's put on now. Okay. Extra punitive tariffs. Okay. Bathroom fixtures, furniture, stuff like that. Okay. That apparently is nothing. That has a lot to do with extra. Steel, no, not subject to the punitive tariffs, because apparently that's not a national concern. But where I getting Italian bathrooms somehow is a threat to my national security. Okay, so this is to do with groups that are lobbying for friends that are lobbying for specific benefits, and then maybe you got the auto companies or other sit back and say, "Gee, we want to make stuff in the United States." But we need to get steel from overseas. Don't worry, you gave money to my campaign. Think of what did he say to? Remember when he was campaigning? He goes to he brought all the oil executives in.
Gave him $2 billion.
He said, give me a few $1 billion, and I'll get this. Put me in the White House, and I'll get this done for you if you give me this money. Okay, so apparently doing it was contingent upon them donating that money. Okay, he didn't say I'm going to do all this to you. And I hope you contribute to my campaigns. He said, he says, I'll do this on your behalf if you pay enough for it. Okay. But somehow that's not bribery. Okay. And somehow they're not practicing bribery. Okay. Right. So of course, Holman receiving $50,000 is no big deal. When Trump's saying, I want a few $1 billion in order to use the government, for your benefit, just write me a check and I'll figure it out. Yeah. So
I almost can't tell if it's Donald Trump and his team like not being self-aware enough to recognize that they're not doing the same thing of past administrations, like that's the incompetence, or they just are being more brazen about it. Like I guess I'm pointing out that they may just be that they're going, well, you did it. Why can't I do it? But they're just more clumsy about doing it, but it's just it's so obvious. That's what's so crazy about it. But to the original point from before, I agree. I think it was Bruce that said it. I think it's almost all just more about pushing that line for him or whoever comes next to be able to have the precedent, the ability.
Yeah, exactly. And we are not a free market country, not even close. And that's what and now, although the lobbying is a little bit different, that's how it happens in Russia and China too. Your friend, you're this or that with Z, or somebody who does X, Y, Z. and and you can become a billionaire, and then you can become impoverished overnight if the government takes it away and imposes billions of dollars of tax they levy on you. That's how the United States works. And say what I think is even more devastating, it means that our genius is diverted from making a better mousetrap and increasing wealth for the whole country into the genius of manipulating government to shield you from competition. That's a huge. So we don't have Thomas Edison's out there, inventing all these new things that are very, very helpful in making life easier for everybody. The Thomas Edisons they're on K Street, or they're lobbying for some new regulation that would shield him from being subject to competition. I mean, you can't even give a quantitative number on that loss because think of how many millions of jobs that Thomas Edison created, the electric light and all these other things, and he's just the tip of the iceberg. But we don't do Thomas Edisons anymore. We do lobbyists, and they get rewarded based upon how much they can shield their companies from competition. Remember Jamie Dimon about the new banking bill, Dodd-Frank. Hey, this is great. It brings a moat among us. We don't have to compete anymore because we're the only ones who can read all those regulations to comply with the darn thing. That's Jamie Dimon, okay?
This is a great example.
Insane,
In 2008, when we had the financial system crisis, okay, what did the government decide when they report? Well, the industry is too concentrated, okay? So we don't like the fact that the industry is too concentrated. So they created all these rules, okay? And now the industry is significantly more concentrated than it was when it was too concentrated, okay? So this is whatever the government. So the question is do you really think these people were very stupid writing the rules, or do you think? I think a lot of the people who write the rules are not stupid, okay? Because the politicians are not writing the rules; the industry is writing the rules.
The industry is writing.
So the industry writes the rules, and the people who are voting to approve those set of rules, they're stupid, okay? But not the people writing the rules. So so this is what who writes these rules? It's like one of the things I would always like to talk about, like having a blockchain for every piece of legislation, is that whoever any time a rule was written, you know who was the author of that rule. And then you could call up that author and say, and every time you edit it, like any legal document, there's black lines, red lines, whatever. So you always know who put a pen to the document and what changes they made to the document, and have it all available in the public domain for a period of time before it's ever voted on. So now now you can challenge everyone. So every lobbyist that really is writing these legislations, and usually it's the lobbying groups that write these legislations.
Yeah.
So as Bruce knows, so that the lobbyists write the legislations. The industry impacted by the rule, they're ones writing the regulations. So they write the regulations for them to deter competition, and then the people who vote on it don't even read it. Okay, they're just told by the leadership, you got to vote on this, and they vote on it unless somebody has a local interest who approaches their local representative and says, this is really going to damage me. Then maybe they'll take a look at it and figure out this is hurting me politically. But do they ever really know what's inside the bill? They have no clue what's inside the bill.
They have no clue. They're not expert in the area. And at best, what they'll do is maybe they'll carve out an exemption for the local bank or something, but it won't affect the whole thing, and say that's how they buy off their vote if that needs to happen. But this is now standard operating procedure, and and that's why, in my judgment, that if we eliminated, if we remigrated our genius to the Thomas Edison side rather than the Jamie Dimon knowing how to manipulate things, we'd have a booming economy. Now, why doesn't that happen? It's because if we did that, the politicians would get no credit for it. No politician gets credit for Thomas Edison, right? He did it on his own. No politicians got credit for Fulton. These people doing it on their own. All the politician cares about is not, does the country as a whole prosper? What's in it for me, right? What's in it for me? And what's not something directly in it for them, and it's just private individuals creating a wonderful country, they don't want that, unless it helps them out, they're not interested. And that's the big blockage to remigrating into a truly free market system.
When you're talking about the Edisons now being in different parts of industry, do you think that's still the case? Like I think we can acknowledge that happened, but to the point to where we are today, do you argue? Let me put it a different way. People that might have want to see the republic restored, do they still end up in that side of it, or do you think they're finding their way into some new element of this to try to set the table in a different way? Because I would argue that people that might actually believe in what we're fighting for would find the same conflict, the same contradiction in any other part of this kind of structure. If you get what I'm saying, is there another? Go ahead.
No, I think that's a wonderful observation, but I think that when you see some of the startups, like Microsoft and Google. They are in the Thomas Edison, but then they migrate and pretty soon they're spending 50, 60, $100 million a year lobbying. Because, hey, wait a minute, maybe the initial founders were that attitude, but then they see down the road, I'm going to need protection because it's easier for me to maximize profits getting protection from Congress than continuing to find our Thomas Edisons. And so all of them end up, inside the cronyism, if you will, inside the bubble here, and they end up all lobbying and they throw out their initial inventiveness, the people who just wanted to experiment based upon their ideas of a vision for the future, without any government control, and they all then migrate back into the government orbit, which is what we see now. Google, they go to the White House and they go to the Kennedy Center and they're on presidents, this or that, and they make huge campaign contributions and lobbyists. I can guarantee you Thomas Edison didn't make a penny of a campaign contribution, for anything. And these are the unseen compression, damper on our economy. We could be fabulously wealthy if we got back, to rewarding building a better mousetrap rather than to evading a new regulation.
Yeah, and in 2019, I think it was, is when Musk in an interview had said that if he didn't get all the tax credits he got, Tesla would have ended up bankrupt.
Right.
So so at the end, it's the American people made him the wealthiest person on earth, and what did they get in return for it? Nothing. So and the question is why should he get tax benefits and tax breaks that not every other person who opens a business also get? So why should the government be making it easier for Musk to avoid bankruptcy than anyone else to avoid bankruptcy? So how many people might have been able to avoid bankruptcy if they got the same value? If you take a look at the present value of those tax breaks, how many other people might have avoided bankruptcy if they got the same value of tax breaks, for themselves, of tax credits, for themselves? A lot of people might have avoided it. So why give preference over, Musk or anyone? And I don't want this to be about Musk. He's just a good example because of the fact that you have a guy who has the most valuable company in the world, and really it was built off tax breaks. Yeah. So there's no way. And then the fact that then when you go out and you raise capital, you can raise capital saying, look at all these tax breaks I have. I got the good relation with the government. I got all these tax preferences. Write me a check because I can deter entry and I can create, because these breaks are kind of unique to me. So of course, the people who want to write checks to the people who are this is what I go back to, the corrupt crony system. Okay, it's a corrupt crony system. The government is influencing significantly, who wins and who loses. So by definition, if you choose who wins, as a consequence, you're choosing who loses. Mm-hmm. So given the fact that the government is so involved, in these decisions, it's got to be a crony system, and money helps drive the outcome. That's why it's corrupt, and they're all working together in a big structure that makes it corporatist in nature, and cartel-like, in nature. That's why they all build these business networks, where they reinforce each other. That's part of also deterring entry. Sometimes it's better. Sometimes I do a better job, protecting myself, being part, instead of being a monopolist, I'm an oligopolist. I build this network of people who we have aligned interests. And to the extent that we have aligned interests, we all want to help reinforce each other in order to deter anyone else to come after us. And we could be more powerful as a group than we can have separately. Okay.
Yeah, and I want to add, Jeffrey, that I want to disown the idea that free markets that I think we champion means that we're callous and we want people, social Darwinism. The fact is that if we actually had a real free market system, this is my belief, we would have so much wealth. We can provide a safety net for those who, for whatever reason, they're handicapped, they're disabled, they came on hard times. That was a kind of, this University of Chicago, Milton Friedman's Family Assistance Plan.
Right.
So we don't have to throw people out and starve them to death. We would have so much wealth based upon the Thomas Edisons. We would comfortably support those who, for whatever reason, came on hard times. And I'm in favor of that. We have enough wealth to make everyone live in dignified circumstances. So I don't want to get the idea that if you're in favor of free markets and real capitalism, then we have hearts of stone and don't understand that, well, there can be circumstances we don't have control over that can lead us to different positions in life. We're not naive. Not everybody's born in the same circumstances. But I go back. The wealth we would have would be so much. We could comfortably support all of these people. And I mean, all the wasted. Can you imagine how many people we could support if we didn't spend $2 trillion in Afghanistan on a fool's errand? Yeah. I mean, we could retire them on the Riviera,
Let me frame it a different way, okay? Yeah. When Trump or other presidents say we need tariffs, we need all this stuff, these countries to take advantage of us, that's all full of shit. I mean, that's bullshit. But take aside is, okay, very simple solution for whatever people say is the rotting of our industrial base, which also is a false statement, okay? So, but let's assume it's a true statement, even though it really isn't, okay? So here's what we need to do, okay? We want to nurture the private sector, not the public sector, okay? Let's shrink government down to where it used to be, 3.5% of GDP. At that point in time, yes, we could use user fees and stuff like that. We abolished the income tax. We abolished the corporate income tax, the personal income tax. So now imagine how much investment is the United States. We dismantle the regulatory state, okay? We get rid of all these burdensome rules and labor departments and stuff like that. I mean, not to have, I wouldn't have any rules, but, some people might want some protection rules or whatever, a few in place, okay? But basically, we dismantle the regulatory state. We've imposed on ourselves, okay? Nobody's forced us to have it. Nobody's forced us to add so much to the cost of hiring people because we make so many mandates every time you decide to hire somebody. We add costs onto you as a business because you made, of course, we're mandating a whole bunch of things you have to give to that people, that make the cost of hiring more expensive and all your compliance costs with us, the government. So get rid of the regulatory state, get rid of the corporate income tax, get rid of the personal income tax. Okay. How many jobs do you think would be created? And where else would people with talent come except to the US if we did that? Okay. How many, we'd have all these universities filled with people from all over the world who were going to graduate schools here. We'd have all this demand for labor because everybody would be wanting to do business here in the US because we created the best conditions for people doing best business in the US. So we don't need to punish other countries. We need to improve the conditions and the incentives for people to do business here because we create bad conditions for people to come here. That's not anyone else's fault but ours. And that's easy to remedy, okay? This is the cost of the fact that we've determined to allocate more resources to feeding the public sector at the consequence of feeding the private sector. So what we've done is we've created so much money to the public sector that we've created a private sector that has become a good partner with the public sector. So they create a symbiotic relationship with each other. But at the end, that's not a productive society, and that's why the middle class gets hurt. That's why, they have no bargaining leverage because if every country wanted to move facilities over here, because this is where the people are, the human capital is, there's limited regulatory state, there's no tax state here, there'd be such a competition for labor, that we'd have given the fact that other costs were going down and people didn't have to pay taxes, what would happen? Who would get a lot of that money of the loss in taxes is they'd go to the workers, okay? Yeah. So, because taxes is a cost of doing business. So if the businesses if the business no longer have these costs of calling business, who's the beneficiary for it? Some will go to workers, some will go to shareholders, some will go to consumers for a load of but everybody wins. Everybody would win in this scenario. So why don't we do that?
Yeah,
That's the answer.
the reason is that
government significantly, deregulate, eliminate the federal income tax, eliminate the corporate income tax, and with that, we would be the manufacturing sector. We would be the sector for every industry in the world, except for areas where we might not be as resource rich as some other country that's tied to some sort of natural resources play. Then we might not, that would not be our comparative advantage, and that's okay.
Yeah, but Jeffrey, the reason why that doesn't happen is not because it's unsound intellectually and for the ordinary person, because the incentives don't work for these sociopaths who occupy government. They don't want that to happen because then they're become largely irrelevant. They can't hand out the goodies. Why would we pay any attention? We would go and we would be subsidizing or heroizing the Thomas Edisons, not the people in power. They don't get on TV anymore. They're not heralded and courted by those who want some government favor. And that's why this where you're intellectually impeccable, it just doesn't work there. And that's why the only way I think we're out of this kind of gridlock, if you will, intellectual gridlock, we have to educate the American people, vote these people out. You want them to elect somebody not to pass laws, but to repeal them and then get out. And we have to tell them, no, we do not want any professional politician. We want you to be there. You have to have reasonable law enforcement with the rules that we have. And we have to have what I call invincible self-defense. But otherwise, get out of there. And you should come back and live under your own regime. And the American people, if they're educated properly, will vote them out of office. But until we do that, they're blinded by this ridiculous idea that, well, if the government gives us something, that's good. But they're giving everybody something. It's bad for everybody. Well, and that's why, some of these systems are really almost shielded, from political investigation or attack. Well, it's good for me, so I want to keep it there. If we need to get everybody out of it at the same time, so no one feels that they're shortchanged, they have to make a sacrifice by yielding one government program where somebody else isn't. So it's across the board, everybody goes. Then we have prosperity that I say leaps. And again, I'm always in favor of a safety net. There's things in life that people don't have control over. We got enough money and power and wealth to enable everybody to live decently. So it's not that we don't know how to get there intellectually. We need to change the political system so they're not a blockade on where we should be going.
So maybe two lessons from this conversation today. One is nullify as much as you can. Okay, when you have an opportunity of nullifying, and the politician that should be most appealing to you is someone who says, I'm not in office to do anything other than repeal as much as I can. So maybe those are the two lessons. Unfortunately, I have to cut it a little short today because I have to go back to my dentist again. Yeah. So Ryan, Bruce, last words.
Well, I'll go ahead. I'll just piggyback on what you said, Bruce, and I'll let you finish. But I just think it's interesting. Goes back to what you said in the beginning of the conversation, Jeffrey, or somewhere in the beginning about the definition of the word capitalism. It's just a misrepresentation of that's not a free market, right? And that's not the way that works. But what's interesting is today, which seems to be a driving force of convincing, I think, even kind of what you said before, Jeffrey, people that might think they're doing good but are misguided about what they're doing, is convincing people that somehow it's not, we have to do it this way because it's all an ideological battle in the world, right? They're ignoring their interest to go after what we believe in. In reality, like you said, there's some of that. But if it was an actual free market, that would represent quite differently. So it's always a misrepresentation. And if we can't even agree on the definition of these words, we can't even have a conversation about this stuff. And that's very much the point. So again, as always, that's why I very much value this conversation, and especially today. So thanks again, guys, and I look forward to next week. Yeah,
I think you put the spotlight on the degradation of language. We can't even engage in discourse, if we don't have at least some common understanding of what the words mean. And we're so far divorced from that. I mean, and I'm always laugh when the journalists pick out one particular element of propaganda. said, listen, everything the government says is propaganda. I don't believe all of it is misrepresenting reality, 100%, because their motivation is political. They don't care whether they're misrepresenting reality. If they think they can dupe the people, and it goes back to those who still read Mark Twain and Huckleberry Finn, The Prince and the Pauper, you may recall, they go out and they convince the audience, of lunacy. And because they're not educated, they believe this stuff. And that's where the government is every day. They're the prince and the pauper selling this nonsense. And it's really quite tragic. I just think how staggeringly wealthy this whole country could be if we actually had free markets. And Jeffrey is absolutely right. We make the United States the beacon, heads and shoulders above any other country, in offering a friendly business climate. We will attract all the business, all the genius, all the entrepreneurship in the whole world, get rid of all these stupid immigration regulations that block people who want to be Americans. we would multiply the GNP, overnight. We can't even put numbers on that. And it's all feasible. It's doable. This is not trying to, invent alchemy or a perpetual motion machine. And the only blockage is political stupidity and crassness and corruption. That's the closing word that I would have.
Well, thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Bruce.
Yeah.
Have a great day.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.